You are watching KillChain Radio, the source for cybersecurity news and trends.
Hey everyone, welcome back to KillChain Radio. Today's a special episode because we're turning a new page. First, I want to say a big thank you to Amar Sonic for all his energy and insights over the early preparation of this podcast. Amar had to step back for personal reasons, and we wish him nothing but the best. We're really extremely excited to officially welcome my new co-host, Bryon Hotchkins. Bryon is basically my little apprentice. He's my nephew, but he's also one of the smartest up-and-coming cybersecurity professionals I've ever seen. We're going to get into his background, his history, and what he brings to the table. He's currently been working at an MSP, handling cybersecurity as well as day-to-day operations. So, Bryon, welcome to the podcast. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to lately and what made you want to jump in here as my co-host.
Hi, my name is Bryon Hotchkins. I am an information security specialist. I'm currently in the MSP sector because it's a great place to learn and develop. I figured this would be a great way to, one, connect with somebody I care about and take my career to the next level and get out in front of the world. So,
love it. You know, that is exactly what we were looking for on this podcast. So today, because this is your first episode and people need to get to know you a little bit better, we're going to spend a little time delving into Bryon's background. And yes, I did talk about you in the third person there, little brother. So yeah, Bryon is my nephew, and we started getting together and working on tech when you were, what, about 14, 13, somewhere in there?
I think I rambled your head off about, like, hard drive specs on gaming laptops. And you're like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. So, and then from there, I've always had a pretty big interest in the industry, even from a young age. I figured if you can't be the best, at least start early. So, and I was very lucky to have a good mentor, among others.
Really? Who was he?
Yeah, it wasn't you.
I wouldn't expect it to be. I mean, I remember you coming in around back when you were younger, man, and to see what you've come in. I remember what you were like when you were younger, and to see what you are today, you know, I got nothing but amazing pride for how you've turned out so far. But the fact that you've turned out as good as you have, I think, is a testament to your ability to not be, how shall we say, persuaded by the dark side. I mean, I put you into some really crazy situations, and we're going to be careful which stories we share with people. But, you know, let's talk about the first time I took you to DEF CON and the preparation of getting you permission to go. How old were you?
I was 16, if I remember correctly. So it was about a 2-hour phone call with my mom trying to convince her you weren't crazy, and I don't know how you pulled it off.
I don't either, because I think I am crazy.
I remember I flew in and I got to, I think it was the Bellagio, whatever hotel we're staying at, and I was like, okay, now I need to go get my tickets, right? And you're like, go to Caesar's Palace. And like, I ended up on a party bus. I met a really good friend that day, like friend for life, by doing card tricks in line at LineCon that year. So I will say, I think one of the greatest things that you can do in life in general is just be personable enough to make new friends. I've met so many people that have taught me so much and helped throughout my life, and you got to be willing to put yourself out there.
I agree, man.
Even if it's uncomfortable.
I 100% agree. You know, my wife tells me all the time, she's like, you can just strike up a conversation with anybody. And some people look at that as a deterrent. I actually look at it as one of my greatest, you know, superpowers is, you know, I can do that. And I love the fact that you can as well. You know, You were saying?
I think there's a lot of people that think they're smarter than other folk, and to have that kind of hubris is a bit silly, because if you can't manage to learn something from somebody, even if they're maybe not in the same line of work as you, or they're a developer, you know, God forbid, then I think that says more about you than it does about them.
I agree. And the one thing now that you've been because you've been in the industry now for what, about 3-4 years, give or take?
About 5 years, so pretty much since I turned 19, and I'm not that old now, so.
But you've seen how networking and the connections, especially in cyber, these are critical, you know, and I love the fact that you're getting in as young as you are. I've talked to a lot of, you know, other members of the CCN, and we all have brought up the fact that, we wish we could have started at your age, but, unfortunately, when we were your age, computers didn't exist. So I think that's one of
It was
the,
a much more centralized world back then, I feel like, and it's something I wasn't personally there for. But something I think it's important to remind a lot of the younger listeners is just because the things exist on Wikipedia doesn't mean they were widespread.
and I was going to say, I think that's one of the things that's going to make KillChain Radio a lot different, is because most of the podcasts that are out there, the people that are hosting it, they're all relatively close in age, and we have we've got over 20-year age difference between us. So, we're both looking at the industry, but we're seeing it from two completely different sets of eyes. And I think that opens us up to being able to give people a very, very unique perspective on not only the cybersecurity landscape, but, employment, current educational needs. What I did when I was coming up in the industry is nothing like what you're going through, and I think that having the ability for us to be able to share that kind of stuff is going to be really entertaining as well as educational for people.
Yeah, I definitely think there are a lot of people closer to my end of the career spectrum where, you're not a help desk guy anymore. You're not like an entry-level security tech, but you are not exactly a senior level either. And I think that's a pretty interesting uncanny valley a lot of people are in right now, and sort of discussing that and what that looks like.
I get the feeling that was an age joke aimed at me and people my age, man. We're not dead yet.
You know about the gray beard tax. You thought you could get away with it by not having any hair, but
just because you know what I look like when I forget to dye my beard doesn't mean that the audience needs to know. So we are going to be putting out episodes probably on a much more consistent basis moving forward. But, as I said, today is, getting to know you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what are some of the projects that you've been working on? What have you done recently in cyber? I'd love for you to tell the story about the malware. And remember, this is a podcast, so you can't really tell people exactly what customer or what it was, but,
choose your words carefully.
Choose your words carefully.
Yeah, so there was recently a cybersecurity incident at my employer, and it was a situation where I can only describe it as, in an arms race, you expect the other guy to be competent, and it was sticks and stones. It was a new client. They weren't fully onboarded onto our stack, and, in an MSP, sometimes that takes a few days, sometimes that takes a few months, depending on the client. But we were able to at least start the remediation process, and I was handed it. There was quite a lot of weirdness that I hadn't experienced in the wild before that I was able to reverse engineer.
Well, hang on a minute. Hang on. The whole point of this podcast is to get, the youth perspective compared to the, we're going to call it seasoned perspective. You say weird. What did you see?
There was obfuscation techniques that just did not seem competent, but still worked.
You tell.
There were things like multi-line strings that were pushed through like Caesarean ciphers, so stuff that you would expect a middle schooler to be doing in a lab, and then they would pass that as valid PowerShell, and that seemed to somehow get past regular Windows Windows Defender. I just would not have expected that, and it was a multi-stage, like it would do something silly like a character shift, so literally just moving a character one over, and then during execution, it would shift the character back, execute it, and then grab another PowerShell file that, for all you know, was just basic 64 encoded with another Caesarean cipher. It was like a really poorly made onion of obfuscation techniques, because personally, as somebody that isn't a malware reverse engineer, I did not expect to see so many techniques that I was able to deobfuscate so quickly.
You're learning. A quick story about Bryon. When I remember when you first, came to me and we were talking, you used to have ideologies, you used to have this grandiose vision of what cybersecurity is. And I if you ever get a chance to meet Bryon, he's nothing like this anymore, but I used to call him Best Practice as a nickname. He was fresh out of school, still had that twinkle in his eye that, people do cyber for the fact that they want to protect people. Having worked at a couple of MSPs, I had multiple conversations with him, especially over the last 2 months, where he's starting to realize that people do cyber for basically two reasons. One is to address a compliancy audit or some kind of regulation, and the other is to just deal with a mess up that has already happened. I remember when you used to talk about, the way that LANs should be set up, VLANs should be set up, segmentation, tiering your architecture. And now you realize that whoever's spending the money is going to take the cheapest way out. And it's up to us as cybersecurity professionals to take a mountain of garbage and try and find a way to keep people safe inside of it.
I don't think you should ever abandon trying to comply with best practices and industry standards, but at the end of the day, unfortunately, we exist to serve a business when you're an employee, of course. So never lose it in your heart, but make sure you're realistic.
I think the term that you're looking for is acceptable risk.
A little anecdote here, I will say, one of my best friends, when I was a security technician at Mill Steel, he was my manager, and I don't know if I can disclose I worked at a place, as long as I don't get too involved, and he just loved when new security technicians would come in. They'd always hire somebody a bit green that still had some hope in their eyes, and he could just crush their soul, and he'd build them back up. It wasn't mean-spirited.
It's more of a boot camp methodology, drill sergeant kind of thing, if you ask me. Because that's what I was trying to do with you. It's like, I appreciate your thought process there, young man, but unfortunately, money talks and bullshit walks.
Yeah, and it was a great learning experience, to, have somebody that was realistic about the state of the world, but also a pretty fun guy to hang out with.
Well, most cybersecurity people were either really, really cool or were like that nerd in the basement that hasn't seen sunlight and looks like Dracula.
One of the stories you recently reminded me of is we were getting these little Pi-based jump boxes installed at some of our sites. I was put in charge of making sure they were secure. And, nowadays if I was told secure Raspberry Pi, I'd say, well, it's in a locked building. If you want to take that risk, that's on you. So...
Oh, you mean you don't have a hardening process that, you could just spit off the top of your head right now?
Not for somebody's custom Raspbian image that is shipped as proprietary software on top of an open source stack. That was not happening. I was told not to touch it, in a software sense. But I insisted we ordered some tamper seal tape, and I made the poor sysadmin put in a PO and go through all these hoops saying we needed tamper-proof tape and we needed Kensington locks. And then it turned out the cases I got didn't support Kensington locks, so I epoxied the Kensington locks on. I put the tamper-proof tape over the SD card so we could know if anybody tampered with our SD cards in our locked plants. And he was reminding me of that when I was complaining about a new person at a new opportunity, talking about best practices. And I was like, man, I don't want to lose everything, but I'm glad I kind of lost that. That was a bit silly.
Well, I think that the industry has to kind of beat you down to the point where you can actually come up with what I would consider to be realistic expectations. Everybody, I remember when I first started, I was going to be Captain Save the Network. We're going to do it the right way. And I'm talking back in the early MCSE days. And then I realized that, it don't matter. Security is always an afterthought. We're a cost center. We're not a revenue generation stream. But without us, there can be no revenue generation. So it's really a trade-off. And I think as somebody that's been around for a long time, I've just learned how to pick my battles a little bit better. But I still see the same things that you're talking about. And I'm just running that over in my head. To secure a Pi, the ultimate option was 2-part epoxy and basically some aluminum foil tape.
And at that point, it was mostly theft prevention more than anything. But
I was going to say, that's not cybersecurity, dude. That's asset management. And if somebody's going to steal something, why would you want to take the $14 Raspberry Pi when I'm sure there was much more expensive equipment that could have been, grown legs and walked out?
I don't think you were running away with a giant steel coil in the back of a Impala, but they could try.
Well, I mean, you do live in Grand Rapids, so I mean, anything's possible. I've heard of stuff disappearing up there, from people to buildings.
Yeah, it was a unique one. When I guess I would love your perspective, other than network isolation. What can you really do when you're dealing with vendor-provided software and vendor-provided hardware that you know is insecure?
At that point, I would say stick it into an isolated VLAN and possibly spin up like an Nginx, reverse proxy that, you can only get in one way. I mean, you'd have to go software layer and deal with it through network topography at that point.
Yeah, and that's also a thing I find, especially in manufacturing, that is key for manufacturing specific hardware. Like, you're not going to talk anybody into replacing a machine that costs more than you do in a year just because it happens to run Windows XP. That's an unfortunate reality in the world that I feel like you kind of miss at conferences and when talking to industry specialists.
Well,
in a perfect world, yes, but...
To your point, I was reading an article yesterday on Kubernetes and OpenShift and just, automation stacks. And you played with Kubernetes and microcates a little bit, or at least you understand.
Definitely not my specialty.
No, not mine either, but I'm definitely decided I'm a sadist, so I'm trying to teach myself right now. I think I'd have more fun just shoving my arm in a power takeoff, but we're going to get through it. But one of the things that they were saying is over 70% of the Kubernetes installs out there, even though Kubernetes is self-healing. That's one of the big pushes is it keeps itself updated. It constantly is updating patches and security updates. Most industries up to 70, I think that was like between 70 and 80%, somewhere in there, are not using that feature because of cab control. So almost 70+% of the current existing Kubernetes systems are actually vulnerable to a lot of different attacks because they're not patched. Mm-hmm. So I think what you're saying in general is a very true statement.
Yeah. And there's also the argument of how do you maintain stability? Like, they're obviously... Businesses don't choose to put themselves at risk. There's definitely a reason a lot of those Kubernetes instances are a little behind.
Well,
and how do you find that happy medium?
It's not even just with Kubernetes. Looking at just general patch maintenance, and we can throw Microsoft out there as the debate point. I mean, we've got every patch Tuesday.
Yes.
And how many I don't know anyone who's going to take a Microsoft patch at face value and just automatically stick it out into their production environment. You got to run that stuff through a sandbox. It's kind of like, the new versions of Windows, when they get released. Nobody wants the first edition. You wait until Service Pack 1.
And
go ahead.
There's our, I guess you could say, bias and fear of trusting Windows, but to anybody that's worked in the MSP sector, in 2020, you remember the VPN apocalypse when they broke the built-in VPN service, and it was a nightmare. Like, to this day, that's the reason a lot of people do not use the built-in Windows VPN client. They basically handed Cisco a VPN client market on a silver platter.
They also
was
it Azure or Entra? I remember they also not too long ago allowed one of their root level certificates to expire, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I do believe so. That speaks to a larger, I think it's interesting that from a cybersecurity perspective, we're putting so many eggs in two baskets, really, which are AWS and Azure. And while obviously, centralized resources, hopefully you'd have better resources if they have such industry titans behind them. But we've seen them make pretty big mistakes recently. I'm not saying your sysadmin's going to do better or your security team's going to do better, but there is an argument against centralization.
Oh yeah, let's extrapolate out on that. Are you familiar with the concept of self-sovereign identity?
I am not. Isn't that something that some little European country tried?
No. It's a framework for a decentralized identity management to validate individual humans. And, you know how I'm all around and about individual human sovereignty. But there's something to be said, like if we take a look at just us as humans, you've got your social security number here in the United States, and that's basically your unique identifier to everything. So if somebody pops that, you're basically hosed forever. Whereas if the identity is actually stored in multiple distributed locations at the same time, it becomes more difficult to actually compromise the entire identity. We're going to be having a guest on here named Dr. Morgan Reese, and that's his big specialty. So we're going to actually get into this in one of the future episodes. That was just a way for me to bring it in as a teaser.
That does sound very interesting. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. So it would be fun to speak to a doctor for sure.
I talk to lots of doctors. Yeah, I talk to a lot of doctors. Usually it's laying on a couch and them telling me, you shouldn't do that. And we haven't even started the discussion about like agentic AI, things like OpenClaw,
So from an MSP's perspective, I cannot tell you the amount of times that people that should know better, like doctors, would say, hey, can we just hand over our entire 365 tenants global admin to this random AI service that I got in an ad on Instagram today? And we'd have to say, no, what are you talking about?
Well, see, but you can't just tell no. You have to try and explain to them in very soft words, this is a bad idea, but I'm going to make you think that you're smart for bringing it to my attention, but I'm going to let you know why you shouldn't do that. And that's a skill all in and of itself, let me tell you.
Yeah, it's certainly one I haven't mastered yet. I think the way that I played that one was telling them, hey, look at this privacy policy, this violates HIPAA, you have a co-pilot license, please don't do this. But
I remember those days, but I in a lot of ways I feel for you. I really, really do. When I was coming up, it was so much easier. We didn't have the same environments, the same infrastructure, the same temptations that people have today. And I give you a lot of credit for keeping the faith as much as you have.
I have always loved this industry. I mean, short of this, I'd probably move into being an electrician or a PLC programmer. And
let's be honest, you'd be a plumber somewhere. Not that there's anything wrong with plumbers. It's one of the few jobs I can think of that AI can't replace.
We love plumbers here, but I will say I don't know why it takes the same amount of education to be an electrician as a plumber when plumbers need to learn shit goes downhill.
It's the angle that it goes downhill, Brian. Come on, there's education there. But no, things have changed. I will freely admit I dragged my feet as long as I could as far as playing with the agentic stuff and MCP, but the world is just moving so much faster now. And, especially as somebody who's part of the older crowd, we didn't have this stuff. So it's a complete mind shift for us. And the reinventing of ourselves in cyber over the age of 50 comes at a very steep learning curve where I feel like you got a lot more benefit from this because you're growing up as it's happening and not having to unlearn.
Yeah, I will say the craziest thing I'd heard from a colleague recently was a non-technical user, like employee at their company, used Claude Code and generated a whole bunch of security incidents, but also was able to make an application that saved them quite a bit of money, to the point that they're talking to devs about throwing it up in Azure. And I feel like we're going to see more and more of that, which is a little terrifying because these people are working outside of the traditional development cycle. They don't have an understanding of security, even remotely, that you would get in a traditional development education. But money walks and bullshit talks. So even if this application is...
You said that backwards.
Oh, shoot. But you have 1,400 lines of code and you understand about 10 of them and they're mostly comments. But if it saves the company money, it's still going to production.
Well, I mean, I don't know when you're on any of your social media feeds, I see the ads for, develop an app with no skill all the time now. I mean, this is an entirely new industry. And I think in a lot of ways, it's good for us in the cybersecurity community because there's never going to be a shortage of incidents. But at the same time, I think I see it a lot like I did when ChatGPT was just released to the general public. I feel like we're giving hand grenades and AK-47s to children. You know, there's a
It's
reason.
definitely there's a level of responsibility and I guess just understanding that I feel like some people don't have that makes it hard. And you can learn. I definitely never want to discount people's ability to learn. But when your accountant starts developing software, you're gonna have issues.
Well, let's explore that one point for just a second. Why would you need to learn? You know, we're living in a, you know, if we take just the concept of vibe coding in general, and then we move it to this, you know, AI app building kind of a back and forth through language models, why do you need to learn?
In my experience, let's say you want to use AI, like I've used AI quite heavily for PowerShell scripting, and you say, hey, make me a little PowerShell script that connects to this Exchange on-prem server and dumps the mailbox utilization and gives me the top 10 mailboxes by utilization in the last week. It might not know what you mean because you didn't ask the right questions or you don't know what you're asking. I said utilization. I didn't say maybe I wanted to know how many times people were reading or writing to that mailbox. Maybe I wanted to know size. If you don't have at least enough of an understanding to know what you're trying to do, you're not going to get what you want.
We're also talking about people that want to understand what they're doing. You know, if we just go back a little bit earlier in this conversation, you know, when you've got somebody at a company who is not a programmer, who wrote an application, created a bunch of security incidents, but it saved money.
You're
Do
right.
we send them to, you know, college? Do we send them to programming courses? Or do we
That's
just,
reasonable.
or is it more along the lines that we need to start looking at a different type of framework where if you're going to try and use something like Claude Code to develop something, there needs to be some type of a workflow where it would go through some, I mean, we understand the concept of code review. Most people don't, but, you know, to that point, you know, if anybody in the company can build things that will save money or make money, I can see the companies not wanting to stifle those efforts, but at the same time, how do we put control around them?
So I definitely agree it shouldn't be stifled. Like, they're saving money. That guy did a good thing. But I think that we don't have the processes in place where, like you're saying, it should go through code review. I almost wonder if your junior developers become more of
Prompt
AI slot
engineers,
refactorers.
prompt AI prompt
Yeah,
engineers.
prompt engineers, but I could see a world where, Tony in accounting makes this app that saves a bunch of money, and then you hand it off to the code base to a junior developer who
Who then
optimizes it, goes,
sticks it
this
into
function
Claude.
exists six
No, no,
times.
no, 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 no. Let's be honest. What's going to happen? The junior developer is going to take that code base. They're going to run it through Claude and go, where are my security problems? You know, and that's one of the big things that I see different. And you're a very, very unique case. You know, you still want to know how it works under the hood. I think of most of the junior level cyber people are jumping on the AI bandwagon, which is good because, I mean, we're going to have to learn it. But at the same time, they don't really have the same desire for the deep knowledge that you do.
I would encourage any younger listeners or people new in their career to pursue that deeper level understanding,
What do you think
because
it gives you? I know
I
what it
think it
gave
make
me, but as somebody who's, you know, closer to their peers, what would you say the deep dive knowledge has, and how has that benefited you?
So what I would say is I've sat through a lot of interviews recently for similar roles to what I was doing. And one of the biggest things I found is people will say they've done a lot, and I'm sure they have, but they don't understand what they were doing. And if I'm trying to find somebody I can trust in a business to do things like run processes, make projects reality, I want you not to buckle when I ask you fundamental questions, even if you were able to do it in the moment. That's I feel like the
You
key,
ask a lot.
though. So, I guess
You're
I
asking
do.
a lot.
And the other thing I guess I think you get from it is if you understand how mechanical hard drives work. That sounds like a really basic thing. It's an A+ question. But that knowledge connects to why we use mechanical hard drives in large data storage senses. That explains why we use SSDs for boot disks and for like quick access on things like hypervisors, but then we store it on spinning Rust. These fundamental understandings allow you to have those connections and be a more well-rounded individual as well as a security engineer.
So what you're saying is you want to hire Bryon and not Claude?
To an extent. I feel like any business can pay for Claude. They're paying for you to wrangle it. And if you can't properly wrangle it, what's the point of hiring you over a homeless man or some guy fresh out of school?
Well, that's kind of a wide variety there, but I have worked for some sketchy companies in my career. So no, I think that's a really good talking point, and it's something we're probably going to have to really bring up in the future. So we've got about 15 minutes left, and one of the segments that I wanted to throw out there is we're going to call it Age and Wisdom over Youth and Exuberance. So this is where I'm going to ask you a question in terms of how your generation and the younger cyber people are seeing things, and then you can do the same for me. How do you personally feel about the idea of integrating local agentic AIs and MCPs into your daily life? Because I was reading an article on Futurist about 3 or 4 days ago where they were saying that most of the people under the age of 27 are either 100% on board with agentic AI and MCP and basically having a single point of interface that can actually perform actionable events and do things for you, or they are completely 100% against it, and it is like it's the Armageddon about to happen.
I'm for it. The problem is I don't think the technology is really there yet, at least from a cost perspective. All these wonderful manufacturers like TSMC have been dedicating more and more die space to AI-specific like NPU workloads, and I still need a 4090 to get OpenClaw to do pretty much anything. So I do think it's an interesting thing, and I'm not against it, but I can see a pretty fun world where, enthusiasts, I would say, not professionals, are throwing agentic AIs on their gaming computers and asking it to do things it probably shouldn't. Next thing you know, their computer's kaputs. But I do think there's a real place in the world for it. I'm just not sure what that looks like yet.
Follow-up question to that is, as you've seen yourself, with trying to find, employment, more and more jobs are actually being removed and ported over to automations, AI, and things of that nature. How do you see that playing in over the long haul? Because you're at the beginning of your career, whereas if I'm lucky, I've got about another 12 years, and then I can retire.
I think there's a general sentiment with a lot of people in my age bracket that we were told from a young age, go into STEM. You need to go to college, you need to get a STEM job, science, technology, education, mathematics, and then you'll be so rich and you'll laugh at all the plumbers. Then we hit the workforce, and it turns out that the plumbers are laughing at us for good reason.
Yeah, they can find a job.
They can find, you're always gonna need somebody to tell you where the shit goes. But
funny, I thought that was our job.
I do think there's a lot of disillusionment right now in the younger generations on that point specifically, but I also think that there's a lot of people that were never really interested in the industry as much as they were interested in the money, and that goes for IT in general.
And then there's my generation, where we are either jumping on the bandwagon and not caring where the wagon is going, or we're so cautious about it. Like, my own private OpenClaw, I have that thing so locked down that anytime it touches a tool, it wants, authorization, and I question how much efficiency I'm actually getting out of the thing just because I have to sit and monitor every command and every return prompt that it gives me. So I'm just too paranoid to give it control. But then again, I'm kind of a privacy fanatic and a control freak when it comes to my network to begin with.
I can't find the exact study, and unfortunately, I probably didn't form my prompt correctly. ChatGPT couldn't help me. But there was a study that came out quite a while ago that's been quoted most of my life, that depending on when a technology comes out in relation to your age, is whether or not it's something you adopt or fight against. And it's never a one-to-one, right? People can always choose to learn. But AI is at a stage in my life where it's like, well, either this is going to be something I choose to adopt or fight against. But there's also the consideration that Generation Alpha and a little bit younger, they're not going to know a world without.
Well, and that's a very good point. You know, you were born after the advent of the internet, so you've never had you've never known a world without it.
So I did grow up in a very rural area, in a very rural setting, but
Okay, Grand Rapids
was
is
always
definitely not a third world country, but it's not far from it.
hey, Saranac's pretty dang close. But yeah, I will say, I think compared to some of my peers, I was a little less exposed to it, but I did not know a world without the internet, even if it was dial-up for most of my childhood.
And I think that changes a perspective because, you know, it's kind of sad when I think about me and all of my peers. You know, we are the last generation that knew life without it, and in a lot of ways, you know, yeah, computers and technology, the internet, AI, call it whatever you want. I think it's enhanced life in general, but I think it's also extremely complicated it. Life
I
when
think that's a very nuanced take from you.
it is,
Yeah, because
but
I
it's still
I had
true.
a canned response ready about to say, I think in general people are a lot smarter. Like you can go on YouTube today and
No,
find
I disagree.
really.
I think people are actually quite dumber than they were when I was growing up. I mean, case in point, let's just use navigation as an example. You know, I had to learn how to read a map. I had to be cognizant of where I was going when my parents were driving me places. I learned street names. I learned navigation. You know, your
Oh, trust me, I
generation.
can't get very far without GPS.
I was going to say, you guys. I remember the first time I ever was got to use a GPS, and it was like a world changing event for me because I will, you know, you've known me your whole life. I am geographically challenged. I will get lost in a parking lot. But I was on vacation down in Florida and I rented a car and it came with at the time it was a TomTom. So
I
yeah,
remember Tom Thompson.
yeah, I know.
They're the scourge of yard sales and old men everywhere.
Hey, we're not that old yet. But I remember getting one of these things and just putting in an address in, and it was like, your turn's coming up in 2 miles. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to get there without having to stop and ask for directions. That is something you have never had to worry about. You have never been on a road trip somewhere and gone, I have no idea where we are. We got to pull into this gas station and get directions. That is something that just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, and I think that begs the question of how we're defining intelligence. I do agree that there's common sense ain't so common anymore, but we also live in a day and age where I think more people than ever have access to niche information and valuable information.
Well, can I throw
Thousands
something
of
in there for a point?
For sure.
You know, say, you know, you're questioning the definition of intelligence. What happens when the internet goes down? Like hypothetically speaking, there's a worldwide backbone outage. You know, we lose the level one DNS for all of the ISPs, and the internet just crashes.
Hmm. Well, I think we have more people now that are trained and educated on how to assist in that situation, as well as people don't forget how to use like Fusion 360 or
Okay,
other
fine.
software.
You're going to make me be that guy in a presentation. Okay. So let's say there's a solar flare and the flux capacitor. No, let's be honest. Let's say somebody turns loose an agentic AI on a ISP, and basically whatever the circumstance. When I think about intelligence, there's a difference between having a basic understanding of how to survive without technology and then being able to survive well with technology. You know, I mean,
Gotcha.
your cousin, we're not going to say which one, but the one I'm talking about, couldn't, didn't realize that when the light comes on their car that says change
That
your
means
oil,
something's wrong.
you need to change your oil.
Right. So that's a good point, but by that definition, a caveman's probably more intelligent than both of us because they've been doing it a lot longer.
Well, in some ways, I think we're
They were
talking,
happier.
well, they were definitely happier and probably had better use of their time. But, I think, all of the things we're talking about, I think are really great topics. And I think this is stuff that we can actually explore over the course of this podcast. So we're down to our last 5 minutes. Go ahead and why don't you take the last 5? Tell anybody anything that you want to tell them. What are some projects you're working on? Where are you going to be able to be seen next? And, what do you hope to be able to present and show people over the course of what we're doing in this?
Gotcha. I've been working on a white paper for a PostScript, sort of a love letter to PostScript attacks and attacks with air quotes around them. Recently, I
wouldn't give too many details about that, considering I know you're planning on submitting that for talk somewhere.
Gotcha.
Somebody will steal that idea. Keep an eye on his LinkedIn. He's, if and when the presentation comes out, we may have him give a little bit of a demonstration here on KillChain. But he's come up with some really, really amazing things, and I do think it's your I'm not going to say youth, but I'm going to say your experience in the industry that allows you to see certain things that people like me who've been in it for 30 some odd years go, yeah, I wouldn't even have thought of that. So it's really cool stuff.
It's something that came out of my love for a deep, low-level understanding of something. I'm definitely not the guy that's going to be writing C code on my Elite Emacs compiler on my Arch box, but I do like
you sadist.
About
you have an Arch box?
No, I'm not that crazy anymore.
But the next thing you know, you're going to say you're going to spend the weekend and load up Gen 2.
Hey, at least Gen 2 people are nicer.
They are
just
true.
Mean. But I do think it's important, even if you don't fully understand it, just to read about underlying protocols and technologies, even if they don't affect you that much, because you might find something cool that you can extrapolate on or find a talk from 2009 in Paris about. So that's something I'm working on. I'm hoping to speak at. I will be at a conference in Texas with the rest of KillChain Radio here in about 3 weeks. No?
Why don't we just say what it is? So Bryon and I will both be live at Cyber HackCon in Plano, Texas on the 27th of this month. Tickets are still available. You're going to actually be up on stage with me and the rest of the Cyber Circus, where we're going to be doing a live podcast from Cyber HackCon. We also are going to be doing some interviews with people on site. So if you're in the Dallas, Plano area, you're going to have people like me, Justin Hutchins. I believe we've got Chris Glandon from Barcode. We're going to have Jason Papillon and Kevin Pentecost from the Cyber Distortion, Philip Wiley. This is when it comes to cyber, this is one of those star-studded lineups that you really don't want to miss.
I'm excited to be there.
Yeah, we're going to get you up on stage there, young man. And as for me, I will actually be doing the closing keynote for OzCon in Kansas coming up on the 18th. So you got me, Win Schwartau, Dr. Gregory Carpenter, Johnny Christmas, another really killer lineup, and just a bunch of really great cyber people. The talks are going to be amazing. So if you're going to be around, definitely come check that out. If you are in the Austin, Texas area, on the 22nd of this month, we are going to be doing the Austin screening of I Am Machine at Med to Market in South Austin. The information and the sign up for that we'll add in the description to today's episode. That's basically all I've got coming up in the near future, unless you've got anything else.
I don't have too much right now. I'm about to go on a fun vacation, so next episode might be recorded from the Dominican Republic.
Ooh. I don't speak Dominican.
I think it's just Spanish, but with a fun accent.
Well, if it's I did live in Puerto Rico, and I found out that Puerto Rican Spanish is not the same as like Mexican or Spain Spanish. So just take it from somebody, and yes, there's a story behind this. I won't say it here on the episode, but if you see me in person and you want to ask questions, ask me about the time I used some Mexican Spanish slang in Puerto Rico. Let's just say it did not end well for me. So my advice to you, young man, if you're going to use any Spanish that you know, find yourself a Dominican friend, test it on them first, and save yourself the embarrassment and the potential butt kicking that I got.
See, you know my Dominican friend. I'm probably going to end up telling somebody's grandma I want to eat their ass.
Yeah, we may let that slide past. I'm not sure. But on that note, thank you, Bryon. I'm really looking forward to doing this with you. I think that, you are one of, as I said, the smartest up and coming cyber guys I've met. And you are an old soul. You're an old cyber soul. You may be a young man, but you think like somebody who was brought up with the technology like I was.
That's what happens when you send a 16-year-old to DEF CON and leave him unattended.
I didn't leave you unattended. You make it sound like you got to Vegas and I just went, go do your own thing. I knew where you were every night.
Yeah.
Let's go with that. Let's go with that. So, on that note, any last words for this episode, little brother?
I appreciate your time, and thank you to everybody listening. And I hope I have big shoes to fill stepping in here for Sonic, and I hope I can fill them.
I think you're going to do great, man. And as far as I'm concerned, you coming on board is going to give a whole different feel to the podcast, and I'm really excited for the conversations we're going to have and the guests that we're going to bring in. So that being said, thank you all for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode, and we will talk to you soon, possibly from Plano, Texas. Until then, peace.